All right. So I'm here with Michael McBride, who's a classmate from USC, and he's been living and working all over the world, and he's now back in the US. He's a Medium writer, a TikToker, and just an all around really interesting thinker. And we're going to cover everything from COVID-19, the evolution of news and media, entrepreneurship, his content creation journey, travel, history, and a lot more. Very excited, and I feel like this is a long time coming. So, welcome, Michael.
Yeah, Cam, super good to be here. Super stoked to do this. How's it going today?
It's going well. It's we were talking a little bit before we got started. I'm in Florida right now. You're in Toronto. Obviously, Canada has its stuff together a lot more than we do, especially here in Florida right now.
Yeah, so I'm on a 14-day mandatory quarantine here. Can't even leave the house because I crossed the border, right? The government of Canada is calling me almost every single day saying, have you left the house? Do you have everything you need? Do you need help getting food? All that kind of stuff. They're constantly checking in. If you don't pick up, they come in and knock on your door and check in person. So
So
it's definitely,
I take it you've picked up and you haven't had any incidents yet, though.
yeah, absolutely. I've kept the phone, attached to my hip. And yeah, but I mean, Ontario has 117 new cases today. I think Canada wide there's 300, right? Compared to the 71,000 in America. So really worlds apart, even though it's right across the border.
Yeah. Well, it's a crazy time, and I want to get into the COVID stuff because I know you were early on that and much earlier than I was, and I definitely want to cover that. Before we cover that, I want to talk about your road trip. So Michael's an avid traveler and couch surfer, and probably a much more adventurous traveler than I am, and I'm here to take notes and learn.
I don't know. You're pretty adventurous too, man. Yeah.
but not in the road trip and couch surfing way that you've done, but you've been road tripping through America and now into Canada during we're in well to timestamp it we're beginning of July, um, and yeah, I know you just wrote about this. Take us through what's this experience been like. I know you've been super careful. Like, for anyone who hasn't read your post, give us the quick story.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay. So I would say, just give some background context. I'm a big traveler. I've been to 36 countries. I'm also a huge road tripper, right? I think a road trip is like fundamentally one of the greatest ways to see a place, right? Right after I graduated university, when I really hadn't traveled much at all, I had no money. I think I had like 1,500 bucks or something, right? And I got in my, 10-year-old Honda Accord and just like hit the road completely alone by myself, right? And I went from California to Texas to Florida, up to Maine, through Canada, down to Wyoming, back to LA, up to Seattle. I pretty much circumnavigated the entire United States. And I just spent 2 months on the road by myself. I did like 14,000 miles. And I think a lot of the lessons I learned on that road trip, I'm applying now. Back then I was, for example, camping out in like national forests and BLM land. That's Bureau of Land Management, not Black Lives Matter. Very tough for SEO for them right now. And so, camping out on BLM land, things like that, 5 years ago, it was because it was free and I had no money. Now it's because like I want to stay very, very far away from people. I don't even want to be in campgrounds where I might be touching the same bathroom door handles or anything. I've been very thoughtful on this road trip, both about kind of how to protect myself and my girlfriend, because I'm traveling with my girlfriend, which is also nicer. 5 years ago, I was doing it alone. And also how to protect others, right? Like, I don't want to be the guy who brings coronavirus to some small town in Utah. Like, that would be the absolute worst thing ever. So
Yeah.
it's been a pretty amazing experience, actually. This is, like I said, one of the heftier road trips I've taken. I road tripped through the Sahara Desert too. That was probably the closest I've come to like the danger level. But it's, I would say it's been really interesting on a couple notes. It's been really interesting seeing like America at this moment. I'm kind of like a student of American culture to some degree. I feel like I'm constantly trying to like observe what the real America is, how people are actually feeling, and seeing how different states, cultures, et cetera, are reacting to the pandemic and functioning right now is super interesting. And we can go more into that as we get into coronavirus stuff. And then also, man, like I have been cooped up in quarantine for like 3, 4 months, like everyone else. I've been taking it super seriously. I got back from London. I was just living in London for 3 years before this. And I literally got the second to last plane out of London. The border closed at midnight. I got out at 11 a.m. that day, packed up my whole life in like 24 hours, got back in Texas. And yeah, since like early March, I've been in full quarantine. So to go from full quarantine to like wild road trip has been both. At first, it was super wild. Like it was such overstimulation. Like the most stimulation I'd had for 4 months was like, seeing a dog while I was walking around the neighborhood. And now here I am flying down the highway and, trying not to get eaten by a grizzly bear camping. So, but then also it's just been refreshing, man. It's been really refreshing to get a change of pace.
And I've been impressed from your blog post, which was you brought all your own food, camping 100% of the time. So like the processes that you took, I found really impressive. I remember was when you're in a gas station, you guys have like a strict protocol of like using a hand sanitizing wipe on the gas pump and then hand sanitizing your hands.
Oh, it's like military. Yeah, it was like, it was so weird because on one hand, and I actually really struggled with this in the beginning. Like on one hand, to me, like the road trip is this like very deep symbol of freedom. I read like Jack Kerouac's On the Road when I was like 14, 15. And I was like, this is what I want. Like, and I've always had that like platonic ideal of the road trip in my head. And, the first time around, my first sort of big American road trip after graduating college, it was like that. I woke up every morning and I was like, where do I go tonight? And that was amazing. But this time around, I found that it actually required a lot of discipline, both in the overall planning process and then in just the day to day, like you just absolutely no quarter on masks, hand sanitizer, religiously, wipe downs, in the gas station. Yeah, it was like at first I was like, well, I don't want to touch anything, so I would use a paper towel or something. But then I was like, that's not enough. I want to actually use like a Clorox wipe so that if I accidentally touch something, not only am I not getting it, but also I'm not leaving germs for the next person. So, by wiping down the handles, wiping down all the stuff on the gas station pump, I'm actually helping the next person or the next 5 people too, right? So I think a lot about doing my part and trying not to be selfish on the road trip.
That's great.
Yeah, because it's just weird time to be traveling in, man. It's a super, super weird time to be traveling in.
Yeah, I deal with what you brought up this multiple times now, which is like feeling like the guilt or the at least the obligation to not spread it and not be like a negative contributor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I've been thinking about a lot too, because on a personal level, some people are taking this opportunity like, hey, let's go travel the world for super cheap. Although granted, a lot of borders are closed. But I feel the same sort of mental, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but just being conscious about, even though we're not in an at-risk category, is like we have a general obligation to not try to infect other people and put other people at risk. And I feel that with with my parents and with other people.
Yeah, 100%. And with this road trip, I feel that doubly so. Because, I've got a pretty decent audience. I think on TikTok, I'm now at like 390,000 followers. So, I have like quite literally hundreds of thousands of people kind of like watching my journey and listening to me. And I feel like I'm so worried that I'm setting this bad example. Like, I don't want everyone to go out and take a road trip. Like, I'm really afraid that's going to happen. I don't think it's safe for everyone to go take road trips. And maybe that is a little selfish of me. It's very utilitarian philosophy, right? Where if everyone does it, it's bad. But I think some of that is because it's just a numbers game and like everyone can't go take a road trip. But then I think some of it is also like I really try to make it clear just how crazy disciplined we've been, because I don't think most people would do that. I've been obsessed with coronavirus, man. Like I've got a little better. This road trip's actually been good to get my mind off it a little bit. But man, the first couple months, all I did all day long was just read about coronavirus. I'm so obsessed with it. The science of it, the epidemiology, the cultural effects. It's just, on one hand, I'm like, how can you think about anything else right now? Right? It's like, It's like we're in, Belgium in 1939. Like what else is there to think about, right? Like other than the war, right? What else is there to think about other than this? So yeah, so I think it's tough. Anyone listening, don't necessarily go and take a road trip. This was also sparked, I should say, to go visit my girlfriend's parents in Seattle. So I felt like we had a legitimate reason. I don't necessarily know if I would just go across the country just for fun. And now in Toronto to see my brother, both things were really, really important and kind of urgent. So I wouldn't say go out for kind of random spurious reasons, but definitely don't fly.
But if you're doing it where you're cooking all your own food, you're staying in a tent, you're not interacting with other people, you're going to the bathroom in the woods. Like, I think you guys have done the what in sustainability terms it's called like the zero footprint. You've done the zero footprint COVID style, basically. So,
right. I've tried to for sure. And I think that it was so funny, right? Like once we got to Seattle, right, to visit, my girlfriend's parents, right? That's actually when it got, once we were in one place in our apartment quarantined, right? That's when actually I felt like we were, worse off, right? Like that's when we were like, oh, you know what? We actually need to go pick up takeout from this Thai restaurant down the street. And I walk on the street and all of a sudden there's 17 people walking past me. And I'm like, this is more people than I've seen in the last week. Right. Like, yeah. So yeah, I do think there's an argument that, when you're kind of off the grid, I kind of joked that we were traveling as if we were like smuggling hashish or something, right? like we were just totally off the grid. And so, yeah, I think that's that probably in some ways, maybe we were safer than we were in Austin. Definitely with the numbers now, like definitely if we weren't 100% quarantined, which I think most people aren't these days. Most people are starting to kind of expand their trust bubbles and figure out what's sustainable for them and what level of risk they're willing to accept. And yeah, so maybe the road trip is honestly not that far off from what you would be exposed to and exposing others to in a major city. I don't know.
I think that's reasonable. So let's shift to talking specifically about COVID, which, the quick backstory with Michael is that he's been writing on Medium and has had some articles that have gone very, very viral. And how many views cumulatively are you at on Medium? Ballpark?
On Medium, I'm at about 500,000 reads. And then on TikTok, I'm at about 40 million, which is insane.
So you've been rocking. And TikTok, you started 8 months ago?
Yeah, September. Yeah.
September.
Yeah, so, yeah, just about 9 months.
So with COVID, I'm trying to paint, for anyone listening, I'm trying to paint the picture of kind of scale that Michael is definitely not like a mega star per se, but people are paying attention to what he's saying. So on February 12th, you wrote an article called "You Should Start Wearing a Face Mask Right Now," and you also talked about like collectivism versus individualism, and it's interesting because, well, as you know, I've gotten really involved with the face mask stuff and trying to get governments and people to wear face masks. But I started at the end of March. Like I really started paying attention and started getting involved at the end of March. And you were way earlier on COVID, on masks, on a lot of this stuff. And you were spot on as far as in your article, you talked about how one of the big issues in the Western world is like we're very me focused and individual focused, whereas where mask wearing is already standard in a lot of Asian countries, it's about like collectivism, about the society, which has become so like
so
such
clear.
A huge like who I'm sure back then you didn't predict that mask wearing would become this like polarizing partisan issue that would like literally divide the nation.
Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't realize it'd be so extreme. People yelling at you in the street for having a mask on. When I was in Utah, I walked into a gas station to get some Band-Aids or something, and my girlfriend and I, we both had our masks on, right? Of course. And the cashier at the counter didn't. And we walk in, and this cashier in rural Utah, he just looks at us, just like looks us up and down, and goes, "Y'all from California?" I'm just like, Jesus, is that really what we've come to? And so, yeah, no, it's wild. And I think that what's funny is, back in February, the whole thesis was basically like, here's what's crazy. Actually, I almost took that article down, not once but twice. I almost deleted that article. I got so much backlash because at first it was like, oh, interesting article about face masks, but then all this stuff about don't take masks from healthcare workers. That kind of noise started to accumulate really quickly. I made a TikTok also. I made a travel TikTok. It was like travel tips for TikTok, and one of them was like, wear a mask. I know there's a lot of back and forth on this right now, but the data shows they work. They very clearly work, right? And I got so much backlash. I almost took that down too. Like middle of March, I think I even have like a note in the top of that article now from like March 9th, where I'm like, don't buy N95 masks, leave them for healthcare workers. I added that
you
because
have that.
yeah, and I added that because I was like getting so much backlash, and I'm so happy I didn't delete it because like obviously masks work. Like it's so clear. But yeah, I back in February, it was more just looking at the history of masks. So it's really interesting. Mask wearing was pretty popular during the Spanish influenza in 1918, right?
But it was a heated topic back then too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was still controversial. There was the Anti-Mask League of San Francisco, it was definitely controversial then too in America. But in Japan, on the other hand, everyone in Japan wore masks for the Spanish influenza across the board. And after the Spanish influenza stopped, Japan basically kept wearing masks. So a lot of like the modern mask wearing of Asian countries, a lot of folks trace it back to SARS, and SARS definitely caused that to increase for sure. But way before SARS, it was quite popular in Japan. Just going back to the Spanish influenza and a more collectivist model of preventing disease and public health. Also, Japan has really bad seasonal allergies with cedar. Like 25% of the population is super, super allergic to cedar pollen there. Like once a year, just sweeps through. Same thing happens in Austin, Texas, actually, called cedar pollinosis. And so a lot of folks wear masks there to prevent allergies too. But I think that you know this better than anyone because you've been, managing the website for all the mask stuff. And you've been doing amazing work over there, by the way, with Masks for All. I can't tell you how often I see that pop up in other places. Really, really, really powerful force for good there. But the data on countries with universal masks versus non is so clear, right? Like it's wild, and it almost boggles my mind that like it's so polarizing in America, considering it's just so simple. Like let's say masks don't work or they're 10% effective or whatever. Like surely there's more important stuff for us to be arguing about. You know what I mean? Like it's so small. It really makes me a little bit pessimistic where I think if we can't even align on this one small thing that everyone can agree on, you want to open businesses back up? Great, wear masks. You don't want to open business back up? Great, we should still wear masks, right? The fact that we can't align on that makes me very pessimistic about solving larger problems. Because I understand that certain things like lockdowns, there's a lot of pros and cons of lockdowns on both sides. Lockdowns are a extremely complex issue on a case-by-case basis, on a city-by-city, state-by-state basis. There's so many trade-offs. I totally get that. There are no trade-offs for mask wearing, right? Other than Janet and Karen are like a little uncomfortable, right? That's it, like that's the only trade-off. There's no other trade-offs. It's wild to me, man. But
yeah, I'm sure you brought up a lot of things that I've been thinking about a lot, which is one, the one about getting pressure to delete the article, I thought is interesting because within my group, within Mask for All, like I've essentially my role has been helping to bring helping researchers bring the science to like the masses and the mainstream. And for anyone who hasn't really been paying attention to the mask stuff is basically like the government. It seems that the World Health Organization and the US government told the public that masks don't work because they wanted to protect the supply for healthcare workers. And feel free, if you think I'm off in any way, feel free to chime in. But the very simplistic explanation is that they wanted to protect supply for healthcare workers. So they told the public that they don't work, even though the science, even back then, like back in March and February, like the science points towards masks probably work. Granted, since then, a lot more science has come out. but there's just been this whole battle, and some of the people that I've been working with received like huge pressure to not be pro-mask. And like I know a lot of researchers and scientists were very worried about, by putting out pro-mask information, they were going to lose grant money and lose different money, like sources of funding for research, which is concerning. But I think, I mean, the mask thing and COVID in general brings to the surface so many issues in the US and in the world. And I mean, one is the division and sort of like the partisanship. And one of the most interesting things that I've seen from the mask side is that before the CDC recommended masks, which was April 3rd or 4th, I think, before then, both Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson came out and were very pro-mask. And they, like, at the end of March, well, Laura Ingraham for weeks during March was like, we need masks, we need masks. And then as soon as, and Tucker Carlson went on this big rant about how, like, what, do masks discriminate against non-healthcare workers and they only work for healthcare workers? He's like, it doesn't make logical sense, which is a great argument. As soon as the CDC switched sides, they both switched sides. And so it's like,
right.
It's one of the most blatant examples of, I mean, it's a bigger issue, which is just like the way the news and media works and for-profit media, but of switching sides during a pandemic to try to pander to your audience and just like drive ratings, which is just a wild, the concept of doing that during a pandemic. And even as you made the point that like lockdowns have trade-offs, masks are aligned with helping the economy and with saving lives. And like Goldman Sachs has said that, Yale economists have said that, and then there's a ton of research on the saving lives part. But the fact that it's become this like divisive issue is just insane.
Yeah, and I think that also it's like, I think to some degree masks are like this perfect kind of lens to view a lot of the problems that I see in America right now through, because, while right now it's very easy to, poke fun at like, Tucker Carlson and the right-wing people saying masks don't work, and the, Ohio politician that yesterday said that we need to stop testing for coronavirus so we don't lock down, going back to, like I was saying, of, kind of the mob coming after me for being pro-mask in February and March. These are the quote unquote intellectuals. These are the, overall left-leaning people. These are the folks who are listening to the experts. And I think that, it's so hard because, I'm in an era that is so anti-expert in so many ways, right? I do try to overall be pro-expert, but also I think that experts are wrong all the time. You know what I mean? Like experts and institutions fail us constantly. And it's like, I'm not really pro-expert or anti-expert. I'm pro-critical thinking and, looking at the data and like, being logical and making your own analyses. But that is such a tough, nuanced position to stake out. And, I think that coronavirus has really exposed problems with the left and the right so clearly in so many ways, right? And not to get, I definitely don't want to get political, but
no,
for example,
but I mean, I think it's reasonable because it's all a part of the fabric of what's happening.
Exactly. And it's overall, it's about how ideology blinds us. That's what I'm trying to say. I think that we have very clearly see how ideology can really get in the way of things. So, for example, Trump's China ban at the very beginning, right? Trump banning, immigrants any visitors from China, right? It was racist, and Trump was making it for a racist reason, but it was still a good idea. So, like, his ideology behind that decision was wrong, like almost certainly, right? But it was unquestionably a good decision. And at the time, you had everyone on the left was railing against him, right? A couple weeks later, New York, lunar.
Was the left really freaking out about? I don't remember this piece.
Oh yeah, freaking out. It was this. I can pull up 10 Vox articles and whatever. And I do like Vox. I don't want to slam, but I can pull up 10 left-leaning media articles. They have
put out some bad stuff during COVID.
Yeah.
And they've gotten skewered for it.
I can pull up 10 things about how immigration bans don't work, and the Chinese ban was based on racism and not science, and all this kind of stuff, right? Now, granted, the Europe ban should have come sooner. Immigration bans as a whole should have come way sooner, and we were focused on China, so maybe that's the way that racism has detracted from that. But then they had the Chinese New Year parade in New York, right? And again, Cuomo was like, no, we got to stand in the face of xenophobia right now and support our Chinese immigrants, which he's right. Ideologically, that's correct. We do need to fight xenophobia. We do need to stand with Chinese immigrants here, right? But we should not have had a Chinese New Year parade, right? So it's like, you can have a correct ideology that can still blind you to the correct decision. A correct ideology can still come up with a wrong decision. And I think that's something that's very, very tough for us to wrestle with today when we have become so tribal and so ideologically focused that something like coronavirus that just demands pure rationality. You know what I mean? It demands pure matter of fact, listening to science, making rational, common sense decisions, is suddenly totally impossible to handle. And over time, I think that we're now seeing that the left has kind of course corrected, and that's one thing that I saw a lot traveling through this country. Is fact is, blue states are doing way better. And I think that we're going to see more of that. There was an inflection point a couple weeks ago where like total case numbers in blue states went below total case numbers in red states, because originally the demographics of blue states being urban centers and more cosmopolitan meant that they got slammed. New York got slammed, Seattle got slammed, etc. But now that we're in steady state, it's actually much more about process than it is about numbers, and if that makes sense. So yeah, so ideology, man, ideology, it's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And one point you brought up that I think is really interesting is about experts. And I've become increasingly fascinated by how people make decisions in our country and in general, and like how people process information. And a lot of that's happened because I've gotten into like just crazy Twitter arguments with people about masks. But the point about the expert thing is interesting because I think we have similar philosophies in that sense, which I very much believe in listening to the experts. But to your point, they're wrong sometimes. And like in the mask case, most blatantly is basically all the experts were anti-mask, even though the science was generally pro-mask. And I think that disconnect is very interesting, and there's a bigger shift right now, which Trump has heavily been leading, which is like, don't listen to mainstream news, don't trust the experts, kind of like trust me or trust whatever you believe in. Which obviously the whole mask thing and the way COVID is handled has not helped in that regard, because people have insane mistrust with the media and even with a lot of experts right now. But it's just, I mean, there's a lot of different themes tied into this. I don't necessarily have an exact point here, but like even our government dysfunction and everything that's happening.
Yeah. So I think my thoughts on it to kind of tie into that are, I find it challenging because when I say don't necessarily listen to the expert, use your critical thinking, look at the data, make your own judgment, right? Some insane conspiracy theorist Pizzagate guy, right? He says the exact same thing. He could say that word for word, right? It's like when we talk about, successful entrepreneurs, right? We say, they need to be headstrong and they can't listen to anyone else around them. They have to believe in their vision, even if everyone around them tells them to be crazy. They can't be willing to compromise. They have to just drive ahead. Well, it's like, yeah, that's the trait of, Steve Jobs, but it's also the trait of the guy on the corner yelling to himself, right? Like, it's like both extremes exhibit the same traits, right? It's just kind of the direction they're pointed in, right? In the context. And so I do struggle, again, also as someone with a bit of a platform, I do struggle with what to tell people. Like, listening to the experts is probably better than not. If you have to be totally binary and just pick one and you're not going to do your own research, like listen to the experts for sure, right? But there are such nuances there that I find it so challenging to wrestle with, to not get lumped in with, with the crazies out there, the conspiracy theorists, right? Because like you said, they're doing the same thing. They're saying that the experts are, BS, and we need to do our own research. So, citizen science is another really interesting world right now on the internet where like there's some amazing citizen science happening in niche fields that don't get any funding, any grants, no real scientists are working on. It's also a host to a tremendous amount of, fraud and sham cures and downright hurtful stuff. It's like anti-vaxxers. I have a tremendous amount of empathy with anti-vaxxers. I know that sounds crazy, right? Everyone always pauses anti-vaxxers as like this, oh my God, how stupid can you be type of thing. I totally disagree. I am very pro-vaccine. Everyone should get vaccinated. Vaccines are great. Let me make that very clear before I say this. But let me make that very clear. But, right, look at how the pharmaceutical industry has treated us for the last 100 years. Look at thalidomide and babies. Look at the horrific side effects. Look at the experiments they've done in the developing world. Look at the opioid crisis, right? So when you have all this history of the pharmaceutical industry doing all these horrible things over and over and over again, right? When they do these 9 horrible things in a row, for you to say, okay, the 10th thing is vaccines, that's also bad. I get it, right? Like the pharmaceutical industry has not been focused on public health in certain respects for a long time. And so, they're wrong about vaccines when they say that, when they point that finger, but I get it because there is a clear pattern there. It's just not real when it comes to vaccines. That's not a case of the pharmaceutical industry misbehaving. That's the opposite. That's the redeeming quality of the pharmaceutical industry, And so I have a tremendous amount of empathy. And so in the same ways with some conspiracy theorists, like, yes, you're wrong, but I do empathize. How can you look at, Iran-Contra and the MK Ultra program in the 1950s, where the CIA literally dosed random US citizens with LSD. And like, these are not conspiracy theories. There have been Senate trials on this. This is declassified. These aren't. So when you have such crazy conspiracy facts that we all know happened because it's declassified, the government, it's literally right there, right? For someone to freak out about Pizzagate or 5G or this or that, like, I empathize. They're wrong. They're super wrong. But I think that this like overall leftist strategy of like, look how stupid they are. We just need to make fun of them until they, realize how wrong they are. I think it's really lacking in empathy for saying like, to some degree, they are staking out a reasonable position, if not a rational one.
Yeah. I saw a stat. I can't remember what poll this was, but it was some legit polls. It was ABC or something. And it said that this is a scary stat, which makes me think that COVID could drag out longer than many of us would anticipate or think about, the survey was, or the poll was about, if there was a COVID vaccine today, would you take it? And it was like close to 50% of people said.
Yeah, right. I saw something
similar
the other day. I saw something similar. Terrifying. Like the chickens have come home to roost, right? Is that the phrase? I think that's the phrase. Yeah. Like all this anti-science, anti-science stuff, anti-vaccine. I mean, yesterday, Trump, I can't believe this wasn't a bigger news story, that yesterday Trump ordered the Treasury Department to looking into removing the tax exempt status of U.S. universities because they're, they are institutions of liberal indoctrination and not education. I'm like, whoa, has the anti-intellectualism in this country gone that out of control? Like, that's wild to me. So yeah, man, that scares me. And yeah, you're right. What percent, especially if the COVID vaccine ends up being closer to a flu vaccine, right? And you have all these viral Facebook posts, no pun intended, of, I got the vaccine and I still got COVID. This vaccine's bullshit. Can I cuss on this? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I got the COVID vaccine and I still got it. This is bullshit, right? If that kind of rhetoric goes around, if it's not 100% effective, I think we could have a serious issue with compliance with the vaccine. And even a vaccine might not mark the end of COVID-19. I don't know, man.
Well, I
It's
think
wild.
part of it, which ties into why part of why the U.S. has been so dysfunctional around COVID is I've spent a lot of time, as I imagine you probably have too, like looking at what other countries are doing and looking at South
Mhm.
Korea and Taiwan,
Hong
and
Kong. Yeah.
it's been really interesting how proactive and just aggressively the government has communicated. Like in Taiwan, it was every hour on TV and radio, they're interrupting and they're doing PSAs. And in train stations, there's constant PSAs like wear a mask, wash your hands. Like in Korea, they're sending text messages to everyone being like, reminder, wear a mask, wash your hands. And the US has not been doing any of that. And I think it's a big thing around it'll be a similar issue with the vaccine, which is people are going to get their information not from the CDC and from the government. They're going to get it from, well, maybe Trump, maybe Facebook, maybe
An email chain. Yeah.
whoever the hell,
Yeah, exactly.
TikTok, like whatever
Yeah.
the hell they're spending their time on. And yeah, I mean, I think during a pandemic, like the government setting the tone of like, hey, this is real. Although granted, the government has gotten many things wrong during the pandemic, but that's kind of like a separate issue. But they should be hammering things down so that there's not people aren't picking and choosing their sources. Like the government should be like, we are the source. This is the information.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I look at my quarantine experience here compared to my first 14 days back from London. And this is when this is when the US had just placed a travel ban on Europe. This is when Europe was like the epicenter, right? And I came back. Bro, customs was one piece of paper. Do you have symptoms? No. Hand to them. No temperature check. They weren't wearing gloves. They weren't wearing masks, right? I got back to Austin. Obviously, no one checked on me. Something as simple as like, I got a pre-recorded message yesterday, and it was like, "Congratulations, you're halfway through your quarantine. We just want to let you know that your behavior is saving the life of thousands of Canadians, and we really appreciate you making the sacrifices." I'm like, that's a pre-recorded message. That takes no effort. The government doesn't need to hire thousands of people to do that, right? Surely that's something that we could do with everyone, quarantining after traveling home in America. It's basic stuff like that that really bothers me. Where I understand the bigger picture is tougher, but to not even get the basics right is just wild. In the richest nation on the planet, the most innovative nation on the planet, to not even get the basics right is really, really shocking, man. Really astounding how dysfunctional it's been.
I agree. Well, I think this is an interesting transition to talk about like the evolution of news and media and how people are consuming
Oh yeah.
information and how
Oh
that's
yeah.
being transmitted. And so you wrote an article about how free news is ruining the internet. And I'm just going to read a quote from this, and then I'd love to get your thoughts. So one quote from what you wrote was, "Free news, as we know, isn't free. With the exception of subscription websites, advertisers pay media companies per eyeball, per article. Your attention is your currency. It's a trade most of us happily make." It's the rise of clickbait and how that's changed the world. Yeah, what are your thoughts on how things have shifted?
Yeah. So, what's that classic phrase, right? If you're not paying for a product, you are the product, right? And that's kind of how what news has turned into. I often talk about kind of the unbundling of news, right? So, 50 years ago, you bought a newspaper and had 30 articles in it and you paid a dime or whatever, right? And, yes, the yellow journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. Like clickbait is not new. Getting human attention has been a goal of media since the times of the Romans, right? And before, you know what I mean? It has always been the goal. But with newspapers, it used to be that you could kind of get their attention with this headline, but then they bought it. So you could have one or two clickbaity articles, but then you get to the, current affairs section and it's just boring data. It's here's what's happening. This is what's going on around the world. And also there was one paper per day. You had 24 hours, to get your thoughts together. Journalists had to write these articles, right? And if something happened at 5 p.m., you banged out the article, but the newspaper still didn't go out until the following morning. And so, I think that the unbundling of news as it's become free, as every one of those 30 articles you now have to compete for eyeballs for. Every single article has to be intense and extreme and clickbaity and the best headline. You can't have a boring article because instead of a dollar for 30 articles, it's 1/30th of a dollar for each article, right? With a payment model. So you have to earn every single eyeball. You have to earn every second of attention. And I think that creates a very perverse incentive for what kind of news gets created and shared. And then I think also it's like there's so much wrong with the modern news media. I can go on about this forever. The 24-hour news cycle I think is really damaging. I am astounded at how quickly we move past stuff, right? Even super significant stuff. George Floyd and the
COVID. When the George Floyd protests, COVID, all of a sudden every 24-hour news thing had like all the COVID cases on the side. They just removed it for like 2 weeks, and then as soon as the Floyd protests disappeared, they brought it back.
Gone. And then now, I mean, I'm super supportive of Black Lives Matter, all the protests. I'm very supportive. So I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all. But doesn't it feel like the George Floyd, case was 6 months ago? That was like 3 weeks ago, And if that feels like, even though protests are still going on around the country, even though this is still happening, people are still campaigning for reform. Old news, right? Old news cycle, gone. What's today? What's going on? And I feel like that's been accelerating for a long time. But ever since Trump got elected too, I feel like there's been a level of chaos on a day-to-day basis that has really accelerated that, kind of yesterday's news doesn't exist mentality. Where, Trump's impeachment feels like it was 5 years ago, not 6 months ago, right? It's all these kind of things. It just changes so fast. And I feel like it absolutely limits our ability to actually make any legitimate change, right? Whether that's through COVID, whether that's through reform and activism, our ability to focus on one topic and change it, right, is abysmal right now because we're just so constantly distracted by the hot news story. What am I supposed to be outraged about today? It's outrage machine, right? It's outrage porn on the right and the left, man. They're both equally guilty. They're both equally guilty of just, hate for profit right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a chart that one of my favorite thinkers, this guy, Nat Eliason, he has a chart. He wrote an article about the general premise was consume less of the news, and that consuming the news is a waste of your time. And he had a graph, and on one axis, it had the importance of each news story. And on the other axis, it had like the amount of time consuming the news. And so basically what it showed is, what the point he was making is that there's like 2 to 5 minutes of news that you need to consume per day. And and after that, it's just like extremely diminishing returns. Like it's just a lot of it's kind of stuff that you don't really need to know or pay attention to. And so with the 24-hour news cycle, it's people just trying to make stories because it's no longer, to your point, it's no longer a once a day, like, hey, here's the most important thing. Here's some other stuff. Now it's like we're constantly, because TV news is TV clickbait, which we got to keep someone, like we got to grab someone and we got to hold them to the commercial and then hold them to the next commercial and to the next commercial. And so, they're either hammering down the same story a bajillion times, or they're making something that isn't that big of a story into a massive story. And
oh, totally. There's a really interesting phenomenon if you look at CNN specifically, right? So Fox News does this even better, but I'll focus on CNN because everyone picks on Fox News, right? So the CEO of CNN, I can't remember exactly what year it was. It was definitely within the last 10 years, I think. One of the main executives from ESPN took over at CNN, right? And no one ever thinks about this, but if you look at CNN programming and a lot of modern kind of 24-hour news networks, right? His whole thesis was the news needs to be more like sports, right? We can't just have some anchor sitting there presenting the facts. We actually need 4 anchors with different opinions. We need Skip Bayless yelling about stuff, right? No one turns on a sports show to have one guy sit there and go, this person scored a touchdown,
side note, this is why I don't watch ESPN anymore. But
right. The Orioles are doing well, You watch it for the hot takes of LeBron James is the greatest player of all time. No, he's not. Have you watched LeBron James? You have no respect for Michael Jordan, and that's why folks watch ESPN, right? Well, big panels. CNN was one started bringing on a lot of far right people. I forget the guy's name. He's always on the panel, but he's always arguing with Van Jones, that one CNN show. I forget his name, but started bringing on a lot of right wing people. Why? Because if you have 3 liberals on a panel and one far right guy, you get fireworks, and you get arguments and hot takes that they can destroy, and straw man arguments they can break down. And so if you notice, every other news network has now followed that model because it was very profitable, right? It did very well for CNN, and now news is like sports. Fox News does that really well, right? I'm always astounded when I turn on Fox News because it's so good. The production quality is so high. It's so engaging, entertaining. It sucks you. My brother loves Fox News, so it's always on. It sucks you in, right? And that's the model, right? Like, they got to fight for eyeballs, and people want to be entertained more than they want to be informed, right? And outrage is a form of entertainment to some degree, right? Outrage produces the same endorphins and dopamine. Like, self-righteousness produces the kind of, the dopamine that gets us focused, as good as comedy or any other kind of form of entertainment. So, yeah.
Have you seen the Showtime show about Fox News?
No, what's it called? Oh, The Newsroom? Is that called The Newsroom?
No. It's recent. Russell Crowe plays Roger Ailes, and it's it's interesting. It's a 6 or 8 episode thing, where it basically it tells the story of Fox News starting and like Fox News's rise, and then, well, I guess Roger Ailes' downfall. But really interesting story, and I actually found it very insightful because I didn't quite realize, I hadn't processed. Roger Ailes has, he sexually assaulted women and did some horrible crap, but brilliant guy when it comes to news and Fox News, which, I mean, from the show, which, I mean, a lot of people probably already know this, but I haven't paid close attention to this stuff, but it's basically, I mean, he just realized, like, there's no news that's catered towards the right. We're going to make that. And in the show, I don't know if this is exactly how Roger feels or if this is more just like a takedown, but in the show, it was basically, the way they portrayed it was like, it's not about the facts, and it's not about like giving people information. It's about like, give the people what they want. It's like, give people the information that they want to hear. And that's how we're going to drive ratings and how it's going to just like really take off.
Yeah. I mean, Fox News was way ahead of its time in a lot of ways, right? Like you look at a lot of things that are normal on, modern news media. A lot of them started in Fox News. A lot of the formats, some of the production quality, the attitudes, for sure. But you're right. I mean, like all those things are doing are meeting a market need, right? They're showing people what they want to see, right? And that's what I always say about Facebook, and to talk about bubbles and the algorithm and this and that. Like, the fact is, and there are a billion psychological studies to back this up, we very much prefer to read stuff that confirms our current viewpoints than challenges them. Period. It feels better. And New York Times recently, and I love New York Times, right? I mean, they're a great publication, but they're starting, as they've moved over to more subscription-based model in the digital age, right? Sure, they've gotten less clickbaity, but they literally published an article on their media strategy, or maybe it was an article, maybe it was a like shareholder report or something. I forget where I read it, where they're basically saying, like, users like seeing articles that align with their beliefs, and so to keep a subscription base strong, you have to feed them this steady drip of articles that they go like, God damn, that's right. You're right about that, And that's the New York Times, man. That's one of the most respected, journalistic entities in the world. So, the fact is, I think that one thing that people in media really recognize that people outside of media don't is the actual dollars involved in media have decreased so much in the last, 20, 30 years that they're fighting for survival. So a lot of this behavior isn't necessarily greedy or they want as much profit as possible, but like, hey man, like times changed. Newspapers started getting killed left and right, and they had to fight to survive and do what they had to do. And that meant compromising on certain journalistic values. Let's not forget, 40 years ago, every small town had a newspaper with like 10 or 20 people on staff, right? Let's not forget, when people actually used to buy a paper every day, the money in journalism was higher at the bottom level of the Dubuque Courier, right? And it was higher at the very top level because let's not forget, it's not just news going online that ate away at media. It's advertisement. Like advertising money in the Dubuque Courier used to be really valuable.
I mean, Facebook
wrecked me. Exactly.
I mean,
they sucked all the
way better advertising spend, like way more targeted.
Exactly. It used to be if I wanted to advertise to folks in Dubuque, I got put out an ad in the Dubuque Courier, right? It was at a radio, Television was national, so that was tough, right? But now I can go on Facebook and target folks in a 3-block radius in Dubuque and, who have, brown hair and shake weights, right? Like,
yeah.
So
well, I mean, the for-profit news piece, which even encompasses Facebook and Twitter and everything else, which is, and we heard about it a lot in the 2016 election, which was, Facebook creating these echo chambers where they feed you what you want to hear because then you click on it and then you spend more time on it. And it's dangerous because it reshapes how we think in the very simple sense. I've been thinking about how, basically the way we view the world is shaped by the information that we consume. And so if you're only consuming information from one side or from one source, or if you dismiss all mainstream news, like I recently, Joe Rogan, what's the guy's name? Joe Rogan has a guy on his podcast who's he's friends with, who's a very extreme conspiracy theorist.
Oh, Eddie Bravo.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge Joe Rogan fan, but that guy stands out of my mind.
And I was curious this is a guy who's every conspiracy theory imaginable. This guy is all on board with. And I wanted to understand his philosophy and like how he thinks and how he gets to the positions he gets to. And how he explained it is when he was a kid, he realized that anything that mainstream news agreed upon, like if people across the aisle agreed upon something, it definitely meant it was false. And so his basic philosophy is that anything that the experts and consensus and the mainstream agrees on is 100% false. And so he takes the opposite position. And that type of thinking is on the rise, not quite to that level, but is on the dramatic rise dramatic. I mean, Trump has pushed this of like, don't trust the mainstream media. Even, at times he's like, Fox News, I can't believe what they're saying, blah, blah, blah. But the idea that now everyone isn't, experts are not experts. And like the pinnacle news networks like New York Times are no longer to be trusted. And it's now just like, believe whatever you want to believe, use whatever sources you want to use. And like the democratization of expertise in journalism. And it's a strange shift that's happening. It's a very strange shift. And yeah, I'm wrestling with how does our world, which this ties into the, I'm sort of going on a bunch of different tangents here, but on like the polarization of our country and the world. And it's like, how do we even get back to a place of like somewhat normal?
Yeah. I mean, how do we heal, right? How do we heal coronavirus? How do we heal the division in this country? How do we heal that, like you said, insane distrust of everything? I think the conspiracy theory being on the rise thing, some of it is because, like I said, there are a lot of sort of conspiracy facts I empathize. And the other thing is, I think alternative sources, signaling is important, right? And authoritative sources used to have very, very strong signaling mechanisms. You had mainstream papers, and you went and bought them. You had 3 news channels, right? That was it, And if you were an alternative news source, you had to go and get photocopies of a pamphlet and hand them out in the street or put them in people's car windshield wipers. You know what I mean? And it was very obvious that you were fringe, that you were crazy, right? You know what I mean? Like it was, the signaling mechanism was strong. Today, I can make a website that looks as legitimate as the New York Times in about 35 minutes. You know what I mean? I can pull up a template, get it up and running, get a URL like the Daily Herald, you know, pick some generic name like that, right?
Chicago Times.
Exactly. And all of a sudden, right, for an average person, especially let's say someone who's a boomer, a little older, right, my signaling is just as good as the New York Times. And it is very tough to tell that I am any less legitimate than a mainstream news source. So I think that phenomena, the inability to actually signal authority, has been detrimental with regards to the propagation of conspiracy theories. Because I mean, the rise of conspiracy theories are not in our head. You know, like you look at Gallup polling, things like that. It shows it is sharply on the rise and has been for several years now. Coronavirus has really exacerbated it, as it's exacerbated most problems in the country. But yeah, I'm with you, man. I really struggle. I'm not a solutions guy. I'm definitely a problems guy. All my writing, everything. I'm a problems guy, right? I'm a critic. I'm the first to admit it, right? I wish I was more of a solutions guy. You know, I don't know how we move forward from a lot of this stuff. I don't know how we heal because, you know, to be totally frank, it kind of feels right now. You know, I've been cooking up an article for a while that I'm trying to find the right words to put around, but it's like I kind of feel like we're in a cold civil war right now, right? I know that sounds super extreme, right? But what is a cold war? It is you are competing on culture. You are competing on economy and trying to, damage each other's economy, right? You are competing on, mind share of the populace, right? You are even having kind of these little proxy wars in other places, right? And that's kind of what it feels like in our modern day politics, right? Like it has become so heated, so tribal. The culture wars have escalated to such a degree that the only framework I can really think that encompasses all of it is a Cold War framework for like a civil war. I do think it's that extreme. 20% of Democrats and 15% of Republicans think that the country would be better off if a large proportion of the opposing side died. That's startling. Those numbers are when you have 20% of America thinking that it'd be good if, half the country died, that's startling. How do we move forward with that kind of vitriol, that kind of an antipathy? How do we heal? How do we restore civility? And how do we fight the big problems that are coming, man? If we can't get folks to wear face masks, how do we fight climate change? How do we fight the next pandemic? What happens if a real war starts around the world, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're too focused fighting ourselves instead of unifying.
Exactly. And that's how, empire after empire has fallen historically, right? So many countries have been brought down by infighting, right? Rather than any legitimate external enemy. So I don't know. What do you think? What do you think are some solutions to, the division, the lack of critical thinking, anti-intellectualism? What do you think are some of the solutions?
Well, I will say, I mean, when I think about things, I'm very much solution oriented, but there are some things that are so complex and so like even racial inequality in our country and gender inequality issues. Like those are two things that are so complicated and so deep rooted that like any solution I think is heavily like there's no perfect solution. Like anything you do is heavily flawed. Well, this is going to sound like a partisan answer, but this is my honest take, so I'm just going to take it for the question you asked. As far as how do we fix the division in our country and a lot of the stuff that's happening? So, as I've spent most of the last few years traveling, and as I've thought about kind of what is my ideology, I think the biggest thing for me is like pro unity and like pro harmony. And I will say that objectively.
And pro what? Sorry, I missed that second word.
I said pro unity and pro harmony.
Harmony. Okay, cool.
and I think objectively, like Trump is one of the most anti-unity and like most divisive presidents. He's the most divisive president of my lifetime.
Mhm.
And so when I look at the division that's happened in our country, and granted, I will say that some of it, he has like surfaced things that are, many of them are already there, but he's just like amplified and surfaced, I think. Um, but I think if we look at the demonization of the media and of experts, and we look at the divide in our country, a fair, like, it's not, I think it's reasonable to point a lot of the blame at him. Um, and I mean, feel free to disagree, but I think, I mean, whether it's a different president on the right or the left, almost anyone you could choose, like almost anyone you could pick is going to be more of a unity, like harmony candidate than Trump. Like, I mean, Trump, his whole thing was drain the swamp. Like, I'm going to wreak havoc, which he has wreaked total havoc. I just don't think, from my vantage point and the scale that I evaluated on, I don't think it's been a good havoc. And I think I have serious concerns around your point of kind of, this is a cold civil war of, I think this is the first time in my lifetime where I feel like it's not far-fetched to think that our democracy could like fall.
Yeah, November's scary.
Well, yeah, because I think what you could see is, after this election, regardless of which side it goes towards, I think you could see mass protests on a level that we've never seen in our country, like that are going to make George Floyd protests look like little tiny town marches.
Yeah.
Because
I think,
yeah,
no, keep going.
well, it's just, I mean, there's very real like voter suppression happening from the right, and we're going to have major issues with our mail-in ballots, which a lot of people are going to make, if things don't go the way that the left wants them to go. People are going to be very upset with how the whole mail-in ballot thing, which also has to do with the USPS. Like, it's a very complex thing. And then Trump is setting the stage for absentee and mail-in ballots are fraudulent, and there's going to be foreign interference. So both sides are setting the stage for essentially, let's call it protesting the election. And I mean, some people on the extreme left think that Trump has been laying the groundwork to basically not leave office, to like, which I think is a bit extreme, but it's a crazy time right now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, right? And like, the kind of language that we're seeing now around voter fraud and questioning the legitimacy of the election and all that, that's a tactic that every oligarch and dictator and fascist government has used over the last 50 years. That's something that comes up time and time again. Happens in Mexico, like every couple of elections. Just happened in Bolivia, right? This constant, questioning of the system enables you to kind of manipulate it any way you want, right? So you say, oh, I know that the other guy was elected, but it was fraudulent, so it's actually still me. So I do have concerns about what November looks like. I tend to, I don't know, I go back and forth, right? There's like two opposing theories of like history. There's the great man theory and the was it trends and forces theory. I'm sure I'm getting the language of that wrong, right? One is, or great person theory, I guess it should be now. I don't mean to be sexist. That's just what they call it. They call it the great man theory. It's an old theory dating back it's an old theory dating back like the 1800s, right? It's way before me. So anyways, one says, the world is moved by Napoleon and Hitler and Churchill, and these people are singular and they change the world. The other one says they are a product of the trends and forces that are already in place, and Germany would have produced a Hitler no matter what, right? Even if Hitler had gotten into a car crash, there would have been another Hitler, right? If Churchill had not been there would have been another Churchill, right? Now, obviously, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? That there are, individuals do have a big impact, but there also are products of the context. I tend, I'm no fan of Trump for sure, but I tend to think of him more as the symptom rather than the problem. If Trump didn't exist, if Trump were to disappear right now, we would still have a bunch of problems, right? If Trump had lost or never ran, I think we still would have had a lot of problems in division brewing in America, right? And I think that those problems of division, and they've been sown for a long time. Look at some of the rhetoric when Obama was president, right? That had nothing to do with Trump. And the Breitbarts of this world existed with or without Trump. You know what I mean? Like the Fox News. So I think that one of the big issues of the left is this endless focus on Trump, right? And don't get me wrong, I get it, because he is probably doing much worse than like Mike Pence would have done, right? Where certain policies would have been probably retrogressive as well if Mike Pence had been elected, but maybe it wouldn't have been this whole scale destabilization of the system. But I also think like coronavirus and everything shows that like our systems were not robust to begin with, right? Our systems were sick before Trump ever started kicking things around. And so, yeah, so I think that, when it comes to kind of healing the divisions of America, healing the partisanship, if you ask both sides what the solution is, they basically say some variant of like, we need to win, right? Like, oh, once we win the culture war, everything's going to be fine, right? Once we get Trump out and take power back, everything will be fine. Or the flip side, they might say, once we, kick these liberals, once these liberals stop, brainwashing everyone, right? And we get, overtake the media, will be fine, right? And I think the solution has to be broader than that. I think the solution has to be bigger than that. I do think there has to be some kind of healing between the divided sides of America, because I don't see how our current culture is sustainable. I'm definitely encouraged by like looking at history. You look at like 1968, 1969, and America was probably equally divided. You know what I mean? I mean, the amount of domestic terrorism in 1968, 1969 of, left and right wing people blowing shit up in America. Like, let's not forget, there was a period of time when like political leaders were getting assassinated by the other side pretty regularly, like Martin Luther King, JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, right? Like there was a decade where it was like, oh, well, we just need to kill the other side, where it was almost a civil war in America, right? Left-wing organizations like the Weather Underground were setting off bombs. They were, burning down. There were a lot of right-wing organizations were bombing and burning a lot of, black-owned places, black-run places. So the fact that we came out of that somewhat in one piece is encouraging to me. But I think that, we need to, I think we need creative solutions that we don't have right now, right? I've been saying recently, I'm like, the way out of coronavirus, right? Coronavirus requires two things to be: creativity and the ability to put up with inconvenience. Those are two things that America is sorely lacking in right now. Right? Those are two things that America just does not have right now. I think kind of the same thing for this division. I don't know what the answer is. I think you're doing a lot of great work with the Masks for All stuff. I think some of it is just putting up competing narratives, right, to try to bring some sense out of it. Maybe there is the next Fox News is actually a bipartisan channel that brings people together, but that's overly optimistic. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like how do you compete with a machine that feeds you so much dopamine? That is so engaging. How do you compete with the outrage machine on both sides? Right, on both sides.
So I guess as we're going through this, I mean, a huge issue in why there's a divide is just that we have a two-party system, and that the two parties have become increasingly divided. And so naturally, because you have to vote for one or the other, and those are your only two options, and those are the people who are driving like the messaging and change and laws and everything, things have become super divided. And so in the same way that I feel, Trump has been someone who has, amplified and in some ways you could make the case that Trump here, some people are going to not like this viewpoint, but Trump may end up being a net positive for the world in the sense that he, to your point of, Trump, you made the case that Trump isn't necessarily like, you said he's a symptom, not the cause. And in some ways, I think you could make the case that Trump has brought issues to the surface that otherwise might have taken like 30 years to come to the surface. Like
totally.
He just surfaced. He's like, all right, like we're bringing it to the top. Which I think the solution, as I probably think about it, well, things need to become less polarized. And how do they become less polarized? Is probably from a leader who is much more open-minded and is not like an establishment candidate. And I actually think, as I think about it, I mean, someone like an Andrew Yang, who is technically aligned with one party, but he's not a politician and he's not grounded in the rules of politics, which, I mean, that's why people like Trump, is because he came from outside the system and came in. And I think I think we need more candidates like that, and we're going to see more. I really wanted Mark Cuban to run for president this year.
Yeah, me too. That's funny. Me too. I did too.
I emailed him and said, hey, man, I'm really hoping you're going to run for president. I'd love to help you. This is back in March, maybe. And he responded, and he was like, yeah, wow, awesome. Like he said, like, not is like possible, but not yet.
Yeah.
The rumor is his wife doesn't want to run for president. I don't know.
Oh yeah, being president's awful. Yeah, being president's like awful. It's like it's terrible, right? Like they all leave with gray hair, even if they come in with without it. So,
but yeah, I think we need independent people who aren't ideologically like attached to one side and are just going to look at things objectively and be like, okay, who come in with the vantage point of like, okay, we need to heal this divide, and like my goal is going to be, let's fix the divide.
Yeah, I think there's just so much baggage now on both sides, right? Like, you need someone that doesn't have that kind of baggage, because they need to be able to appeal to both sides across the aisle. And I think right now, everything, like the masks thing, everything becomes an artifact of the culture war, and you almost need someone who's above that to bring it back. But I think I do think a multi-party system is usually more robust than I think the two-party system is tough. I think that's really hurt us. I think the modern Republican Party we should have like 6 parties, right? The Republican Party should probably be like the far right, alt-right people, and then kind of these like traditional conservatives, and then kind of like call them like, I don't know, fraternity Republicans, right? The guys who are like wear Sperry's and want low taxes, but are like relatively socially liberal in their personal beliefs. You know what I mean, right?
Wear Sperry's and want low taxes. I like it.
Yeah, right. Like that person today has to fall in line with Trump. You know what I mean? And like that phenomena hasn't been great. And then the Democrats should probably be, again, centrist business people, one party, reformers, one party, and then more like democratic socialists, a third party, right? And so, I think it would help. But then you look at what's going on in the UK, for example, and even a multi-party system can very quickly kind of form coalitions that becomes basically a two-party system by any other name. So I think it's more robust, it's better, but it's not a panacea. And then I think the other thing is, like, I think we also need a broader context where it's not just Trump and it's not just America. Like the other argument for like Trump isn't the problem is, okay, if Trump's the problem, then what's happening in the Philippines? What's happening in Brazil? What's happening in the UK? What's happening in Turkey? Why are we seeing this partisanship?
That's fair.
These cold civil wars erupt truly around the world. And I think that, and this is way bigger picture stuff here, but I think the fact is, like, the next 50 years isn't going to look like the last 50 years because we are in the middle of a modern, a second information revolution, right? And the fact is, just like when Gutenberg printed his first Bible, all he thought was like, oh, this is great, I can make more Bibles, right? That's all he thought. It's like, this is great, I can make a couple more Bibles per day, right? He didn't think, oh, this printing press is actually going to bring down the entire system of feudalism. It's going to bring down the monarchy. It's gonna absolutely destroy the current world we live in fire, mind you, right? In truly hundreds of years of vicious war, right? Um, he couldn't have seen those destabilizing effects. And so kind of same thing today. It's like, oh, cool, social media. We can share cat videos. This is great, right? What we are going through right now is not just a political blip. It's not just a moment of division. What we are going through is a wholesale change in the fabric of the human experience, right?
Yeah.
And that change, I've always interpreted that change as starting with kind of social media or the internet, right? But there's actually some good argument. I read something the other day that basically posited that actually the information revolution started with radio. Radio was actually when they look back in 500 years, it seems like a long time now, but when they look back in 500 years, it's going to look like radio, television, internet, social media. It's going to look like a very the rise of instant mass communication is going to seem very, very hockey stick like. So, again, Martin Luther, not King, Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer from the 1500s, 15. Oh, geez. I think I might be off by a century.
You're way more of a history buff than I am, so I have no idea.
He goes, nails his, what is it, 99 grievances to the door of the church, right? All he wanted, he's like, I just want to, reform the Catholic Church a little bit, right? That kicked off hundreds of years of war, genocides, persecution, Protestant, Catholic, completely reshaped the entire dynamic of Europe because one guy had one idea and, nailed the door. And then the Protestant Reformation started and everything went crazy, right? So, my thesis and also my fear, right, is like, this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. All the chaos, all the change, it will continue to increase non-linearly. It will continue to increase exponentially, right? And what we're seeing now is child's play compared to what's going to look like 10 years from now, right? Because 10 years ago, things seemed really chaotic and intense and fast moving, right? And we didn't even have social media. The iPhone had just been invented 10 years ago, and we thought, oh, there's a lot of viral videos and crazy stuff and email chains, and this seems like a lot, right? What does it look like a decade from now? Shit does not slow down. Progress does not slow down. And progress is messy as hell because progress breaks things, right? And I think that the modern information age, we have all these tools that we don't really know how to use, right? And it's having a massive destabilizing effect on the world, right? Informationally, with regards to bubbles, right? Economically, like the internet is largely responsible for kind of globalization and the concentration of wealth to a few, right? And all these factors from the modern information age have led to a very unstable world, right? Our old system is now extremely strained, and we are feeling it creaking, right? And it's very tough to predict what's coming next, but probably more destabilization, But like you said, Trump might end up being a good thing, right? The Great Depression sucked, but if it wasn't for the Great Depression, we wouldn't have gotten Social Security and Medicare and national and conservation works and dams and national park, all that kind of stuff. So times of crisis and destabilization are also opportunities for reform and progress.
Yeah.
So, this chaos could very equally be positive in the long run. But how long is the long run? If it were to be 1900, and you're sitting there in London, and I were to say, hey, 50 years from now, things are going to be really good, right? Or Berlin. It was Berlin in 1907, And I said, hey, 50 years from now, you're going to be chilling, right? It's going to be nice, right? They'd be like,
that's almost my entire lifetime.
right. They'd be like, okay, cool, but we're about to go through a 30-year period of hell, So
Yeah.
I do have faith in the long term, but how long is the long term? Do things get better in a couple of years or a couple of decades? I don't know.
We shall see.
Yeah.
I want to transition to talking about like your content creation journey and entrepreneurship in general, but I do have one last question in this general sphere, which is, there's a whole debate happening right now, which it's about cancel culture. It's about free speech versus hate speech, and like, what is okay and where do we draw the line? And I'm curious to hear your perspective from the UK versus the US, in the sense that the US is basically, and you probably know more than I do, so feel free to correct me, but the US is basically like total free market, free speech, in the sense that you can essentially say anything. People might try to cancel you, but you could basically say anything. In the UK, there are like hate speech laws where you cannot. I think it's against the law to do things that are defined as like hate speech, which is like saying things that are hate related towards specific like religious groups or race groups or different things like that. And I think that covers both like the media and citizens in general. What are your thoughts on, because this is a big ideological thing right now of like cancel culture, what should be free, what's acceptable free speech, what should not be? What are your general thoughts? I don't know how much time you spent thinking about this lately, but what are your general thoughts in this sphere?
I think that we need to be very careful, right? I think that there needs to be boundaries around cancel culture, and there needs to be intent, if that makes sense, right? What bothers me most about, not most, one of the things that really bothers me about cancel culture right now is it feels so chaotic and random. You know what I mean?
Well, it's done by the mob. There's no rule.
Yeah, it's just like every day it's a new target. Every day it's a new thing. What bothers me is this like outrage carousel that cancel culture seems to enact. I think increased accountability is great. You know what I mean? I think the fact that Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby got canceled is awesome. Like they should be canceled, right? But I wonder, cancel culture to me, here's my biggest issue with it, right? Is it feels like a lot of energy deployed in a very sporadic way that sometimes is not effective to accomplish like the goal of cancel culture. Like and when we talk about, I feel like these are always tough conversations to have, because one of the problems is it's just language, right? When I say cancel culture versus someone else say cancel culture, they can mean 10 different things. So for example, when a super, left-wing person hears cancel culture, in their brain, they hear, accountability for racism, sexism, et cetera, from, powerful public figures, right? You know what I mean? When someone from the right wing hears it, they hear stifling free speech, a cudgel to beat people with, you know what I mean? Right. And so, when I say cancel culture, each person's going to think something totally different, right? So I think maybe even not even using those words and using a other terminology can be helpful to be more specific, because I think language is really important with a lot of this stuff, right? Sure. The overall trend of using social media to sort of expose and attack people, right? That overall, right, the goal, the kind of stated goal, not stated goal, but the goal of, let's say, that movement, if you want to call cancel culture a movement, is like, we want a more equitable society, right? We want a society that is better off. We want less racism and less sexism and less this and less, right? That is the goal, theoretically, of cancel culture, right? I don't think cancel culture is the best way to accomplish that goal, right? I am totally aligned on that goal. I just think cancel culture is ineffective and oftentimes actually retrogressive, right? Because like the right always speaks out against cancel culture. Cancel culture is the best thing that's ever happened to the right. Do you know what I mean? It's the best thing ever. The right should love cancel culture. They should thank the left for creating cancel culture, right? Because it's a distraction. It's every day a new thing, right? We can't actually focus and get a politician out of office. We can't actually focus and actually, change something, build in some reform, this, that, right? Why? Because Lin-Manuel Miranda said something about Puerto Ricans, or the Goya Beans guy yesterday, right? With everything going on right now, should we really be spending our time and effort on the Goya Beans guy? Every moment we spend talking about the Goya Beans guy takes away from police reform, takes away from this, it takes away from that, right? It becomes this just dopamine cycle of outrage, right? Of, oh, this feels good. Let's get mad at this person, this person, this person. And every day it's just whoever is the flavor of the day, right? There's not even a cohesive thing of like, oh, you know what? Let's look at police officers and make a list of 150 police officers who we think should lose their positions in America. That'd be effective, right? It'd be systemic, right? No. Yesterday it's some, politician. Today it's, like I said, the Goya Beans guy, right? So like boycotting Goya is probably not the best use of our time right now. I totally, support people being mad about that. I get that they're mad about that, but like there's so much going on. Surely that energy could be, there's a limited amount of energy we have, right? There's a limited amount of space to be taken up in social spheres, right? Surely we should deploy that energy to the places that are most effective for solving the problems of sexism, racism, et cetera, right? But it's not. Cancel culture becomes this endless distraction. Like I said, the right should celebrate cancel culture. It's the greatest thing ever for them, right? And
it's an interesting point.
Right?
I hadn't heard that before. I think that's an interesting point.
And also, I think that cancel culture has a really interesting feature where, it seems like a lot of the time, imperfect allies are punished far harsher than actual enemies, right? Because you can only cancel Trump so many times, right? You know what I mean? Like, right? The actual problems of bad police chiefs and corrupt politicians and all that, right? Cancel culture is not going out after them, right? It actually tends to be relatively left-leaning folks, like Ellen DeGeneres said the wrong thing, so now let's cancel Ellen. It's like, is Ellen the problem? I don't know, right? Like probably not, like, is she perfect? No, and like, if shit was really good right now, right? If shit was really good right now and like progress was just steaming ahead, it might be like, yeah, we have time to talk about Ellen. Let's solve this. But it's like, no, our house is on fucking fire. We need to put out this goddamn fire, right? And that fire is right now is like coronavirus, but it's also like, racism and sexism and things like that, right? And you're over there being like, who put these fucking curtains up? They're so ugly, right? It's like, okay, sure, we can talk about these curtains later, and so yeah, so I think that cancel culture is just ineffective at accomplishing its old goals. It's the secondary effect of sort of stifling free speech. I am less nervous about than I think a lot of commentators. You know what I mean? I think that there's a lot of things working against free speech, and it's always a give and take. And I think that sure, free speech is important, rational debate is important, and I do think we need to be able to have tough conversations, right? And people need to be able to come to terms with things they've done in the past, moving forward, right? Like I do think that sometimes cancel culture forces people push people away that would otherwise, reform, be part of the cause, etc. So yeah, I does the free speech thing concern me a little bit? And then the UK versus America, I think the UK just has different standards around conversation now. It feels like the UK. I was in London though, so I'm probably a little biased because like I've experienced very much like metropolitan, cosmopolitan UK. It feels like people there are a bit more willing to engage in civil debate, engage in conflicting viewpoints.
More willing to do that than here in the US?
I think so. And this could be just selection bias from my experience, there's like a banter culture in the UK that is both somewhat harmful because it can be for sure like sexist and racist and stuff, but like taking the piss is kind of a thing in England. And I feel like people have a little tougher skin there. You know what I mean? Like I always say with racism, it's like in the UK, they'll like say a racist joke, but be way less racist than Americans who don't say anything, right? Like there are a lot of very polite, some white suburban Americans who never say a racist joke, never say a bad thing about black people, and look at a job application and say hell no to this black person, you know what I mean, and deny loan, and right, and they don't say anything. They tick all the boxes for cancel culture, right? They tick all the boxes perfectly, right? They're cruising right along and being quiet, not saying anything, but harboring deeply racist beliefs. That's not to say that the UK is is not racist, because the UK is racist as hell in a lot of, in a lot of respects. But I think that there's a bit more kind of banter, right? And a bit less racism overall in London compared to major cities in the US. But UK has its own problems with racism. I don't mean to say that they're a stellar example of anything. But yeah, we have to be able to talk about stuff. We have to be able to have a civil debate, right?
Agreed.
If we can't, then it's tough to move forward. And the resistance of both sides to even engage is worrying.
This goes into the echo chamber thing of, if you're not having conversations and you're not hearing the other side and you're just in your own bubble, then you're like, that's not the way we're going to make progress. And we need to find middle ground and like increasingly just embrace that. I mean, the COVID thing could have been a perfect thing to unite us all. It's humans versus a virus.
Yep.
And instead of it being humans versus the virus, it became like, it's our side versus their side. And like, oh,
yep.
God.
So everyone, I really thought that this would be like an Independence Day moment, right? And we're all fighting the aliens.
This is the perfect opportunity.
This is it. And I'm like, if this isn't enough to bring us together, we're fucked. Like, if this isn't enough, what is, right? Part of me thinks that if we were to go to war today, if there were to be another Nazis and we were to go to war with the Nazis, half America would be like, are they really Nazis? I don't think, should we, it is concerning, and I also don't mean to necessarily sound like, I don't mean to sound like two privileged white guys saying that we all need to get along, because I think that both of us acknowledge that there is hard work that needs to be done when it comes to reform and progress, right? And sometimes that is ugly and does require conflict, right? I don't think that stirring up conflict is necessarily bad. I just think that fundamentally half this country can't hate the other half forever. That's not a sustainable model for a country. So how on earth do we move past that? I don't know.
I agree.
I don't know.
Well, shifting gears, let's talk about your content creation journey and your entrepreneurship journey. Obviously, you quit your job. You've been rocking on TikTok, and you've grown from 0 to almost 400,000. Let's hope that, it's a whole nother thing that we could get into, which is whether TikTok,
let's hope it doesn't get banned. Whether
TikTok will survive.
Yeah.
But you've done great with writing and content creation, and share a little bit about that journey and thoughts for other people who are interested in creating content and becoming a content creator. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's my thoughts are, we are existing in this age where I think that traditional forms of media are becoming less and less attractive to most people, right? And I think that I tell everyone, everyone is a content creator, right? If you have an Instagram, you're a content creator, right? Period. I always say this is, if I were to tell you, this is how much things change. If I were to tell you 20 years ago, every 2000, I'm not telling you 2000, if I were to say every single person in America is going to have 3 websites just for themselves, you'd be like, wait, that's insane. Of course they're not HTML coding. What are you talking about? And yet here we are. We all have Instagram. We all have Facebook. We all have Twitter or some third, thing usually, right? So you are a content creator, right? Everyone has a platform. I think that's amazing, right? To some degree. And I guess if you want to get more serious about it, I just think that, I started writing on Medium 4 years ago now, because I started working as a management consultant in a corporate job. And I used to be a filmmaker in college. I made documentaries. I got into South by Southwest. I was in theater in high school, so I've always been very creative. And after a year in the corporate world, I said, I haven't written anything longer than an email in a year, I need some creative outlet. And I just started writing. I just started writing kind of random kind of think pieces on Medium. And that was the first thing to really get some traction. I started Idea Soup on Instagram, which was kind of short.
For anyone who's interested in following your content journey, let's give a quick shout out for all your social media And where should people
Yeah,
find
everything. I'm at idea.soup pretty much everywhere except Twitter, where I'm at idea_soup. But if you just Google idea soup, all my stuff will come up. That's kind of my sort of brand online. And so Instagram didn't make a ton of traction on. Actually worked with Cam to get a couple thousand extra followers early on, and get some growth there.
Instagram stuff?
Medium was the first place to really hockey stick. I did one article called "Why Do All My Friends Want to Kill Themselves?" And this is really interesting. So I spent like a year or two really trying to write palatable content. And then one night I was just like in a bad mood, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to write something good. I don't care if anyone likes it, right? I wrote an article called "Why Do All My Friends Want to Kill Themselves?" And it was super vulnerable and like esoteric. It was like quoting like T.S. Eliot poetry all throughout it. It was like not your usual. It was so clickbaity, unconsumable kind of an article, right? Super dark, and that like blew up to 250,000 views almost overnight. And all of a sudden, people are messaging me, "Is this you?" And so that was really cool. And also that's when I started getting a lot of messages of people being like, "Hey, I was thinking about killing myself and I didn't because I read your article," or "I'm depressed. Do you have advice for me?" Or all of a sudden I started to realize, like, even though I'm just some guy, I wrote one article, I had all this impact on people, right? So it made it very clear that like creators of any scale can have an impact, even if one person reads it. And then when a year basically just kind of crushing on Medium, and then I got on TikTok in September, and that's when I've gone really viral, really nuts. Because A, it's an organic platform. You can get a lot of organic growth. It's new, a lot of white space. And B, I got really consistent with it. I post TikTok every single day. And that consistency was something that I could never maintain with Instagram or Medium. I was always kind of judging myself on those platforms. TikTok felt so like, it's just TikTok. So I could just kind of throw stuff on there. And so I make 1-minute videos about history, science, like just fun facts, make it accessible to people and younger people. And yeah, that's really exploded. So I quit my job in March to be a full-time content creator, even though I had barely made any money from it. And still, 4 months later now, right? 4 months later, I'm still struggling to monetize in a sustainable way. And I want to be very honest about that, because one thing I've always hated is like a lot of these like creators are a lot of the creators like totally broke, but they pretend they're super successful. And actually, I think it's
from the high horse of like
yeah, exactly. And I want to make it very clear that like, even as a, some people would call me a quote unquote influencer, hate that word, right? I'm still struggling to really create a business around that in an effective way right now. And so I kind of want to be more honest about my journey on that, because I think that's going to be more compelling to people than me just being like, "Oh, brand deals and thousands of dollars." Because I haven't quite seen that with TikTok yet, because the advertising dollars aren't there in the same way they are with Instagram. And so, yeah, so now I'm trying to build my Instagram and YouTube following. And I do want to strike brand deals, but again, another reason why I haven't made a ton of money is I've been very selective. Like I haven't done a single sponsored post on TikTok yet, because I cut one brand deal, but then we made something and didn't go out, because like my relationship with my audience is based on trust, man. Like if you're an educator, right? Which ostensibly I am. Education is a relationship based on trust. I trust you will tell me the correct thing, right? I never want to betray that trust. And so, I want to partner with brands that are super, super in line with what I believe, very much brands that I support 100%, that I can put my stamp of approval on the product. But yeah, so I guess this is actually, and we talked about this the other day.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to kind of get your take on like, let's say someone wants to become a digital nomad or something. What is your kind of blanket advice for folks who are heading away from a traditional job and into a more non-traditional entrepreneurial world?
Yeah, it's a good question. And well, I'll plug. So I started a site recently called Freedom is Everything, which is freedomiseverything.com. And it's about this, which is about like, how do you live a life full of freedom, working online, living wherever you want, just trying to live like a better, more conscious life. That the piece on the entrepreneurial side, I'm still trying to figure out how to best frame that. I guess I'll start off by answering the question by saying that I think getting a remote job is a lot more doable than most people realize. So getting
especially post coronavirus.
Yes. But getting a job, well, I guess everyone's remote now, so this isn't that original to say anymore. But like 6 months ago, it felt more original.
6 months ago, this is a hot take.
But I think getting a, let's call it, remote sustainable job where like post COVID, you can live and work wherever you want is much more doable than most people realize. And so I think that's a reasonable path for people to take, which, I mean, that's the first baby step of like, if you're not in an office and you can be anywhere, that's going to give you a ton more freedom. As far as starting a business, this is something I'm still figuring out. And I haven't written a deep dive article on this yet. I've been doing my own deep dives and then writing articles on specific topics. And like the transition, it's complicated because I think it's unique to each person in your skill set as far as like how you can make money and what you're going to do and how you can make it financially sustainable is unique to you. I think one straightforward one is if you have a particular skill set that's in high demand, whether that's, I mean, the main ones are engineering, design, like things of that sort. It's pretty straightforward to do like freelance work. And then, I mean, my path was basically, I just got into starting digital businesses of like, how can I create passive income businesses to make money, so that I can just like free up my time and do whatever I want. And where I've done well is within like affiliate content and affiliate businesses, which are websites with information, get traffic from Google search and make money by linking to other sites where people buy things. So that's like, for me, that's kind of just what I've stumbled into and what's worked well for me. I think it's a complicated process. I think, well, we talked about it on the content creation side. I think the challenge is with all this stuff, it's unique to what's happening. Like, you know, with your specific content, to your point, like what you're promoting, and which essentially what you're promoting is how you're making money, has to be aligned with what you're doing. And I think that's the case for whatever you're doing, unless you're some like Instagram model, and then it's just, you can promote whatever the hell you want because people are only looking at you because you're hot. So people don't really care if you're going to promote like really random crap. But I think, I mean, that's where we talked about like a newsletter subscription is, I think, super well aligned and interesting because that's like knowledge based, and it's basically just getting your audience to pay for like more access and more information from you, and getting people to go deeper, which is like using platforms to generate new leads and then monetizing by like bringing people in deeper, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
I have three actually. Okay, let me start with this one, which is like, you know, when you say, okay, I want to start digital businesses to bring in passive income, that's something that like everyone and their mother has had as an idea, right? That is not a new idea. How did you take that from the thing that everyone wants to then cut out a space on your own in that world?
So I think the first part is, this is something I've been driving to. Well, I guess I just want to paint this picture as far as like this wasn't like an overnight thing for me, in the sense that I've been working on like trying to figure out how to make money online since like 2010. And I didn't really figure it out until like 2018, I guess. So it took me like a long time. But the biggest thing I think that really clicked, and where that all of a sudden, like I sort of figured it out, is on a very simple level. Like there's a lot of businesses that make money online that aren't very complicated, and also just like aren't that, let's call it, defensible. So I think one of the simplest things to start thinking about like, how am I going to make money online? It's just looking at business, like study what is already happening. Like, who is making money online? What are they doing? And that's the biggest, I think that was the biggest shift for me, where things became tangible, as far as looking at just like poking around and just like keeping my eyes out for like, okay, this site, how are they getting traffic? How are they making money? How complicated does it look like for them to build this? And just like understanding like, okay, like this is their business model. This is probably about how much money they're making. And just spending time looking at different like passive income type businesses. So stuff in like the drop shipping space and the affiliate space, and just keeping my eyes out and looking through those businesses. And actually on my site, I put together a list of like 250 different like profitable businesses and sources to find some. Because I think that's one of the best places to start, is just like start thinking about who is making money and how are they doing it, because then it just like, it'll help you to frame like, okay, like these are different possible ways to make money. And then as you think about how your skill set fits into that stuff, and I think that's one core, very important principle.
Love that. And then kind of second thing is, it seems like, and is, so I guess first part of the question is, I think, I know you've done like 10, 20 things now, right? I think a lot of those you run in parallel. So I'm sure even now you have 7 or 8 things going, right? So the first question is, am I correct? Or are you only trying one thing at a time? And if you are doing a lot of these things in parallel, how do you kind of structure your day, structure your life to be able to manage? Because I know me personally, right? I can do one thing really well. I find it very tough to manage 10 different threads at once, right? So how do you think about your time and energy when you're managing multiple projects at the same time in parallel?
Yeah. So the first thing is, when I first started doing this, so I started traveling the world and trying to do digital businesses in beginning of 2018. And at first, I was doing all kinds of different businesses. I had a U.S. exporting business, like exporting American products internationally. I had a drop shipping business, selling other people's products on my own site. I also had like content affiliate sites. I was running a bill negotiation business, like all at the same time, and like and what I realized is that was way too much. Like that didn't work. I like doing a lot of different things, but doing things that are completely different types of businesses is way, like, I couldn't balance that. What I do now is like everything that I'm building is in the content space. Like they're all content sites. So everything is, because it's in the same category, I can, when I like find someone that I like working with, I can use them across all my different sites. If I improve the process for one thing, then all of a sudden I'm like repurposing it across everything. So like everything translates. So in some ways it's like working on one thing, I'm learning things that will immediately be applicable to everything else that I'm doing. So like I'm working on stuff that's all in the same general family. And so while my site's like, yes, right now I have Mass for All. I have a site called Test and Trace. I have Freedom is Everything. I have my personal site, which is camwoodsum.com. I have a voting site, which is mustvote.org. I now have like a Black business site called 5/5. And I have a few other ones as well, but they're all in the same general family of like their content sites. As far as managing them, I think it's just important to point out that like I've realized the limitations, and the limitation for me is like they have to be like anything that's not a content site. I'm basically just like, I don't do those anymore. And I used to do, I had an Instagram growth business that did pretty well. That's now just a content site, and like everything's a content site, and anything that's not within the content site sphere, like the blinders are on, like those opportunities just don't exist. Managing them, I think one big thing is I subscribe to the philosophy of, what's the guy's name? I think the guy's name is David Allen. It's Getting Things Done is the book, which is one of my
I've heard of that.
It's one of my favorite productivity books. Yeah.
Really?
Love it. In the core, if you haven't read it, like a few very core amazing takeaways. One is, if anything takes less than 2 minutes, do it immediately. Don't write it down. And then another big one is just that the human brain is not designed to like to hold information and to remember things. It's designed to like to execute and to do things. Or it's not necessarily it's designed. It's most like productive, and it works the best if you're just doing and you're not holding on to stuff.
Yeah.
And so in order to facilitate that, you need to create a system where you can write things down and you won't forget them. Like an organization system that works where everything can be stored. So for me, I now use Notion. I used to use ClickUp, but I use Notion, which I basically just have like every project that I'm working on, and then I have like all the priorities listed out, and I'm constantly updating that list. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying I spent a huge amount of time working on the organization of how do I keep everything in front of me and keep things well organized so that I can consistently prioritize and things won't get lost. But that's taken me years to work on. And then I just oscillate between projects. Like I oscillate between what I think is either most interesting or is the highest use of my time right now. And that's constantly shifting, but I think one big thing to emphasize with all this is I'm figuring all this stuff out on the fly. Like some of it I have figured out, like I figured out focus on content businesses, but I'm still figuring out how to, with a bunch of different things going on, how to structure the team that I'm working with and how to allocate my time best and how to be most efficient. Like it's a constant, I'm just trying to experiment and always get better all the time.
That's awesome, man. That's really, and then on that note, kind of what are some tools and routines that you sort of live by on a daily basis? What does your day-to-day look like? In the sense of one thing I've really struggled with, and I think part of this is quarantine and pandemic as a whole, right? But I really thrive in environments of high accountability, high structure, high pressure, right? Like I'd probably do great in the military, it's really like really intense environments is where I'm best. Like if there's a crisis, like you want me on your side. We need to stay up all night and get something done for work, you want me on your side, right? Environments of like ambiguity, endless time, right? As I've kind of gone on my own, I've found that on a day-by-day basis, like very few days are as productive as I actually want them to be. So I'm curious to hear what are like routines or tools that you use, things like Notion. Like I'm going to go Google all this stuff afterwards. What are other tools that you use just to like stay focused, keep the gears turning day by day, or routines like in your personal life to keep up that discipline, especially since you've done so much traveling, like, working in Bali and things like that, I'm sure it has its own set of challenges and distractions. So what are some kind of routines and tools that you've used in the productivity world?
Yeah. So, I've spent a huge amount of time thinking about efficiency, and my life is like all about efficiency, which is why, when we were setting up a time to talk originally, I sent you my Calendly link and just let you schedule it. Cause I think going back and forth about time is just like a huge waste of time.
Totally.
One of the biggest things for me, I think there's a bunch of different things. One of the biggest ones for me, and I think I got this from Mark Andreessen, who's a venture capitalist, which is every night write down like the 3 to 5 most important things to do the next day. Mm-hmm. And so I've taken that to heart, and that's one of the biggest ways for me just to stay organized. Like some people like using calendars and time blocking.
I'm writing all this down.
Cool. I don't like time blocking.
Although I guess I could just go listen to this afterwards, couldn't I?
Either way, I'm taking notes here too. No judgment. I think, part of it is there's a different system for everyone. For me, I don't like time blocking. I like free flowing through the days. Like I like unstructured, free flowing. I basically run no meeting, no phone call days and businesses. So like my days are just completely open to create and flow. Every night I try to write down like the 5 most important things for the next day. And then I just try to focus on those. And then I'll reference my Notion for like kind of the longer tail and more information in the high level. My phone is always on silent all the time. I try to like minimize interruptions. The only thing for calendar notifications, it's like insanely loud. So it's like a bomb alarm basically, which that
Yeah,
way, because everything else in my life can wait except for calendar notifications, because those
totally.
obviously are time sensitive. Um, so I try to very much minimize interruptions with uh, very few notifications on my phone and like no sounds. Like every call goes straight to voicemail. Like if people want to call me, they have to text me first. So a lot of it's just focused on focus and flowing and trying to stay focused on like the priorities for that day. Um, I think those are the big ones. I think what I've realized is the system needs to be unique for each person.
Mhm.
For me, I've realized since I started traveling, I've become exponentially more creative. Like
Mm.
I've always been a very creative person, but as I've started living like free flow days with no schedule, no responsibilities, my creativity's just gone through the roof because I spend more time just thinking, and I'll just go on
Yeah,
random thought
yeah,
trains and and
totally.
I'm sure you feel this way as well, but I go on random thought trains and just spend time thinking. And I love having no time blocks, nothing, and just free flowing. And I think sometimes it makes me, I'll have days where I'm not that productive. Like I go through my own cycles where even the last like few days, I haven't been that productive. Um, but I have an internal motor, which is like, okay, this is stuff I got to get done. And so it just goes in cycles where I'll be not that productive and then super productive. And I don't know, I'm definitely not perfect and I'm still always trying to figure it out and get better. Um, I do love, man, this doesn't exactly answer your question, but from the standpoint of working for myself and not having clients and not doing anything and having no schedule and like no responsibilities is just a awesome way to live life. Like it's just very freeing, and your mind, it's hard to even fathom going back to anything
Yeah,
else.
totally. Do you drink coffee? You drink caffeine?
I go through cycles. Normally, no. Sometimes I'll do high caffeine tea.
Okay.
I don't love
Yeah,
coffee.
yeah. Because
What
of the
about you?
caffeine or the taste?
The effect.
Hmm. So maybe January, February, I like listened to some podcasts about sleep, and I got super obsessed with sleep science. So I cut out caffeine for like 3 or 4 months, and I just recently got back on it during this road trip. And I think I'm becoming more pro caffeine. I think my
Okay.
productivity
Okay.
waned with the lack of caffeine. Um, what kind of what kind of tools do you use for like the basics like email, calendar? What does your like productivity suite look like? So you use Notion for big project planning. What do you use for email? What do you use for calendar? And then are there any like tools that you swear by with regards to like, are there SEO tools you use? Are there like tools or software that you couldn't live without?
Yeah, I mean, my whole life is powered by tools. So there's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
a lot. So email I've started using, I just switched over and I'm a huge fan. I just switched over to this not super well-known email tool. Like I went through, I tend to, when I pick a tool, I know you wrote an article about like spending a ton of time reading reviews, so you'll relate to
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I'll read all the reviews, I'll do a full gambit, and I'll
Totally.
try to make the best decision. From a tools perspective, I feel like it's actually a fairly high impact choice. But I use something called TwoBird, which I really like, and it's all about like simplification of email. So it feels less like I'm sending an email and more like I'm sending a chat. Like it almost
Mhm.
feels like I'm sending in like WhatsApp response.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really fast. Calendar, I use Google Calendar. I use Calendly to schedule stuff. Um, Other tools, I couldn't run. Well, I do things in Slack for communication, although I really don't love Slack that much. I've been thinking about I'd like to switch off.
It's so overhyped, man. It's so overhyped.
Well, it's
overhyped.
really not good for it's not great for remote teams just because stuff gets lost so fast. Like things disappear.
And then all of a sudden, every project is its own thread, and it's just and lights up, and you don't check it. Like Slack becomes as asynchronous as email very quickly.
Yeah, Slack's not great. What's the Twist is the Slack alternative made for remote teams. If I built out my remote org like is super small, so it doesn't really matter. If I had a bigger team, I think I'd switch to Twist. But the challenge is like when I'm working with volunteers and stuff, like everyone already has Slack and they don't have other stuff. So
totally.
Trade-offs. SEO tools, Ahrefs, Ahrefs is great. I also like Alexa. What else do I like? Well, there's one other tool that I really like, but they've gone dark on me and they're not providing any support, so I'm not going to shout them out. Let's think other great tools. I use Grammarly, which I think for people that don't know about Grammarly, I would understand like knowingly not using Grammarly, but if you haven't used Grammarly, basically think of it as like a spell checker on mega steroids. So especially if I'm not an amazing, like you're a great writer. I'm an okay. I think of myself as being a great communicator, but not a great writer. And Grammarly's great. So definitely if you want to make spelling and grammar issues less, use Grammarly.
My only issue with Grammarly is the accesses they require to your computer are insane because they see everything you type ever. So I was like, but they're obviously great orgs.
Interesting. You could do it just in Chrome though, right? I think because I don't think I have it on my computer. I think I'd have it just on Chrome.
Right.
Other tools. Let's think. Those are the main ones off the top of my head. I'm trying to think. Are there any other like general categories that I've missed for accounting?
Website building.
I use ZipBooks. Website building. I use WordPress.org.
What about taxes?
I
haven't done my taxes. They're doing 4 days?
Taxes. I use a person, so I don't really use software. So
I know. You know what? I used an accountant last year, and I had such an awful experience. I'm going back to do it myself. It was so awful. That you want a service that does not exist. Someone needs to make a Yelp for like white collar professional. Like, why can I not Google like best accountants in Texas and get a list of 50 accountants? You know, why do I still have to go to like my like aunt's friend's accountant? You know, why why is that still such a word of mouth business? Friends. You know, God, it's so annoying.
It's a valid point.
Yeah, like almost everyone just uses an accountant that someone else they know uses. Right, like it is the discovery for those kind of white collar services is still so 20 years behind, you know.
Yeah, but I'm all about efficiency. I mean, even I'll shout out for podcasting. I don't do any manual editing. Like I'm not going to edit this, and I use something called Auphonic, which we may have talked about this before, but basically. I'll like plug in the 2 tracks of us recording and it'll auto edit it. And obviously it's not going to be as good as using a human, but it saves me the time of coordinating with a human. And right now, because not that many people are listening, it doesn't matter that much. I'm rocking with it. Any tools that you use that you couldn't live without?
Bro, I'm a caveman.
What do you edit your videos with?
Adobe Premiere. Adobe Premiere is great. Okay. Yeah, Adobe Premiere is great. I switched from like Mac editing to Adobe Premiere. That's been huge. Totally worth every dollar for that. Amazing tool. Steep learning curve though, but I'm still kind of figuring it out. I shoot on Sony cameras, Sony a6400 for YouTube. I use iPhone software use of productivity. Nothing, man. I've tried so many things and just gone back to pen and paper. I got my notebook, start every day. I write down what I need to do.
I use Evernote, by the way. I should shout that out. I really like Evernote. I log everything in there.
So I was a super, super early adopter of Evernote. And I feel like I was like too early where like internet and syncing and everything wasn't quite good enough to make it a good experience yet. So I think I bailed on it too early. what was I going to say? There's one thing I was just about to ask. Yeah, Evernote is awesome. What else do I use? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Zoom for calls. No, I'm not a tool guy like you. I'm not.
So I know.
I use.
Well, I was going to ask about Zoom. So Zoom's become the de facto leader, but
how? I know, right? Why? So bizarre.
I just use it because
everyone else uses it.
I get honestly, I will admit, I have when it comes to video calls, because I feel like right now, if you're not using Zoom, people are like, oh, but I'd be curious. I want to test Zoom side by side with like WebEx and the other different.
What's crazy is pre-pandemic, I felt like WebEx was the standard, and Zoom was like kind of the outlier. And it felt like overnight, Zoom became the standard. Super bizarre. Super bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I used to use Google Hangouts, which Google Hangouts is objectively bad. Like Google Hangouts objectively has
really?
lot. Yeah. You always have audio problems. Like it's actually, there are significant issues. So Zoom is definitely a lot better than that. But I feel like most people using Zoom have not tested side by side with other stuff. Like probably, I would guess like 98% of their customers have like not actually just like done a side by side test. I'd be curious. I'm gonna go read reviews about this. But anything else that we haven't covered that you want to cover or chat about before we sign off here?
Yeah, no, this has been good. I would just say, to folks listening to this, don't be part of the problem, right? Stay educated. That's the other thing we haven't talked about is like, I don't want to get into this, but I feel like the solution is actually education. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about, teaching about history and science and stuff. Cause I feel like education is a lead domino that solves so many other problems in our society. Yeah. And I feel like we've come to this point because our educational system has been so strained for the last 20 or 30 years, endless budget cuts and this and that, and I feel like that is actually the force multiplier. So if you listen to this, keep reading.
I think that's right. I agree with that sentiment.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. This has been awesome, though, man. This is way longer than I expected. And if anyone is still listening, thank you for making it through this.
Well,
all this ranting and back and forth.
I feel like we've covered a lot of good stuff. Yeah, me too.
I really enjoyed this, man. It's been great.
Well, it was great to chat, and thanks for being on here.
Awesome, brother. Really appreciate it, man. Have a great day. Thanks for everything.
You too.
Take care, man.